Good morning. We continue our breaking coverage of what may be the most audacious military operation in recent Latin American history. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro is now in United States custody after being captured in the...
ẹ kú dédé àsìkò yìí ẹ jọ̀ọ́ kí ẹ wo fọ́nrán yìí mi ò ní sọ̀rọ̀ tó pọ̀ lé lórí bí àwọn ìjọba Amẹ́ríkà bí wọ́n ṣe lọ mú ṣé gúrù náà ń pè president Venezuela gbogbo àlàyé lẹ́kùnrẹ́rẹ́ gbogbo ìpápátá ló wà nínú fọ́nrán yìí ẹ farabalẹ̀ ẹ jẹ́ kí a jọ wò ó. Bákan náà Sheikh Gumi ó deny ó lóun ò sọ wípé àwọn USA wọ́n ń tájẹ́ẹ̀tì wọn ní Nàìjíríà. Òun ló wà ní gàdàgbà ojú kókó ìwé ìròyìn Daily Post. Sheikh Gumi deny claim that USA target him in Nigeria. Ẹ jẹ́ ká lọ wo fọ́nrán yìí.
Coverage of what may be the most audacious military operation in recent Latin American history. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro is now in United States custody after being captured in the early hours of this morning. But as more information emerges, we're learning that this wasn't simply a military victory. This was a catastrophic security failure that began with those closest to the Venezuelan leader, his own bodyguards. The question everyone is asking tonight is simple. How did the United States pull this off? How did American special forces penetrate one of the most paranoid security apparatuses in the Western Hemisphere? The answer, according to sources close to the operation, is as old as warfare itself: betrayal from within. Multiple intelligence sources are now confirming that members of Maduro's personal security detail, the men tasked with protecting his life, were the ones who handed him over to American forces. These weren't low-level guards or perimeter security. These were elite bodyguards hand-picked for their loyalty, trained to take a bullet for the president. Yet in the end, they took American money instead. Let's start with what we know about the timeline of events. At approximately 1:45 a.m. Caracas time, Maduro was at a secure location in the capital. The exact address has not been disclosed, but sources indicate it was one of several safe houses used by the president to avoid assassination attempts. These locations change frequently, and only a handful of people know the president's whereabouts at any given time. At 2 a.m., the first explosions were heard across Caracas. These strikes, as we now know, were diversionary. While Venezuelan military forces scrambled to respond to attacks on Fort Tiuna and La Carlota airport, a much smaller operation was unfolding elsewhere. A team of Delta Force operators, transported by stealth helicopters, landed near Maduro's location. Here's where the story takes its most dramatic turn. According to sources familiar with the operation, these American commandos did not have to fight their way in. They walked in. The outer perimeter guards had been told to stand down. Security cameras had been disabled. Alarm systems had been deactivated. When the Delta Force team reached Maduro's personal quarters, they found only 2 bodyguards still at their posts, and these men immediately surrendered without firing a single shot. The entire extraction took less than 12 minutes from landing to takeoff. Maduro and his wife were aboard an American aircraft before Venezuelan military command even understood what was happening. By the time Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez realized the president was missing, the helicopters were already crossing into international airspace. So how did the United States flip Maduro's bodyguards? The answer lies in a sophisticated intelligence operation that began more than a year ago. American operatives, working through the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency, had been systematically studying Maduro's security apparatus, looking for vulnerabilities. They found plenty. Maduro's bodyguards, despite their elite status, were facing the same economic hardships as ordinary Venezuelans. Their salaries, paid in worthless bolivars, couldn't buy basic necessities. Meanwhile, they watched as Maduro and his inner circle lived in luxury, flying to Cuba for medical care while Venezuelan hospitals lacked basic supplies. The resentment was deep and growing. American intelligence identified 3 bodyguards in particular who seemed susceptible to recruitment. The first was a senior member of the presidential security team, a man in his late 30s who had been with Maduro for over 6 years. He had a sick daughter who needed medical treatment unavailable in Venezuela. Despite his position, he couldn't get her the care she needed. The second was a younger guard, ambitious and frustrated by the lack of advancement opportunities in a system based entirely on political loyalty rather than merit. He had watched less competent officers promoted over him simply because of their family connections. The third was a veteran security official who had served under Hugo Chavez and had grown disillusioned with what he saw as Maduro's betrayal of Chavez's vision. He believed Maduro was a usurper who had destroyed Venezuela for personal gain. Making contact with these men required patience and extraordinary care. The approach came through intermediaries. In one case, a former colleague who had defected years earlier. In another, contact was made through a family member living abroad. The initial conversations were vague, testing the waters. Would the individual be willing to simply provide information? What about their concerns for Venezuela's future? Only gradually did the conversations turn to more concrete proposals. The Americans were offering life-changing sums of money. We're talking about packages worth between $10 and $20 million per person. But more importantly, they were offering something these men couldn't buy at any price: escape from Venezuela and a future for their families. The bodyguard with the sick daughter was promised immediate medical evacuation for his child to a hospital in the United States, with all expenses covered for life. The ambitious guard was offered American citizenship, a new identity, and financial security. The disillusioned Chavez loyalist was told he could live out his days in peace, knowing he had helped free Venezuela from tyranny. But money and promises weren't enough. These men needed proof that the United States was serious and capable of protecting them after the operation. So the Americans did something extraordinary. They extracted the families first. Over a period of several months, the wives and children of these 3 bodyguards were quietly moved out of Venezuela. Some left on commercial flights under false pretenses. Others were smuggled across the border into Colombia. By the time the operation began, these families were already safe in undisclosed locations. With their families secure and millions of dollars in escrow accounts waiting for them, the bodyguards agreed to cooperate. But the plan required more than just 3 men. A successful extraction would need coordination across multiple layers of security. So the 3 recruits were asked to identify other guards who might be sympathetic. The network grew carefully and slowly. By the time the operation was ready to execute, at least 8 members of Maduro's security detail were compromised. Some were active participants who would facilitate the American insertion. Others simply agreed to look the other way at critical moments. A few were told nothing but given instructions that would keep them away from their posts at the crucial time. The operation almost didn't happen. There were several false starts when Maduro changed his schedule or location unexpectedly. American forces were put on standby multiple times, only to stand down when conditions weren't right. The breakthrough came when one of the compromised bodyguards was assigned to overnight duty at the safe house where Maduro would be sleeping. This guard was able to provide real-time updates on the president's location and the disposition of security forces. He confirmed how many guards were present, where they were positioned, and most critically, which ones were part of the plan. When the Delta Force team received the final green light, they knew exactly what they were walking into. The actual operation was clinical in its execution. The outer security perimeter simply melted away as guards who had been paid off abandoned their posts or claimed they saw nothing. The Americans moved through the building, encountering no resistance. When they reached Maduro's quarters, the president was apparently asleep. He woke to find American special forces in his bedroom and his own bodyguards standing aside. There are conflicting reports about Maduro's reaction. Some sources say he immediately understood he had been betrayed and went quietly. Others claim he initially thought it was a training exercise or a test of his security team. One particularly dramatic account suggests he tried to appeal to his bodyguards' loyalty, reminding them of their oaths and the trust he had placed in them. If true, his words fell on deaf ears. These men had already made their choice. The extraction itself was textbook special operations work. Maduro and his wife were flex-cuffed, hooded, and carried to the waiting helicopters. The entire team was airborne within minutes. By the time the rest of Maduro's security apparatus realized something was wrong, it was far too late to respond. What's particularly striking about this operation is how thoroughly the Americans had penetrated Maduro's inner circle. These weren't peripheral figures or distant associates. These were men who stood next to the president every day, who knew his routines, his fears, his secrets. The fact that they could be turned speaks to the complete erosion of loyalty within the regime. It also reveals something important about the nature of authoritarian rule. Maduro's security didn't fail because of technological superiority or military overwhelming force. It failed because the system he built was fundamentally hollow. Loyalty purchased through fear and patronage is not loyalty at all. When a better offer comes along, it evaporates. The bodyguards who betrayed Maduro made a rational calculation. They looked at their options and chose survival and prosperity over continued service to a failing regime. They knew Venezuela was collapsing. They knew Maduro's grip on power was weakening. They knew that eventually there would be a reckoning. The Americans simply offered them a way out before that reckoning arrived. Now the question becomes, where are these bodyguards now? According to sources, they were extracted along with the American team. They're now in protective custody, likely being debriefed by intelligence officials. Eventually, they'll be relocated under new identities, their promised payments delivered, their families kept safe. For them, betraying Maduro was the beginning of a new life. For Maduro, it was the end. The man who survived coup attempts, assassination plots, and years of international pressure was undone not by his enemies, but by his own guards. The irony is almost Shakespearean. He trusted these men with his life, and they sold it for the price the Americans were willing to pay. This operation will be studied for years as a masterclass in intelligence work and psychological operations. The United States didn't need to invade Venezuela with tanks and troops. They didn't need to bomb Caracas into submission. They simply needed to identify the right people, make the right offers, and wait for the right moment. The bodyguards did the rest. As more details emerge, we're likely to learn even more about how this operation was planned and executed. There will be congressional hearings, after-action reports, and eventually, perhaps, books written by the participants. But the basic outline is already clear. This was a betrayal purchased with American dollars and executed by men who decided their loyalty had a price. The broader implications of this operation are still unfolding. What happens to Venezuela now? Will there be chaos or a transition? What about the bodyguards still in Venezuela who weren't part of the operation? Are they now suspects facing potential execution? And what message does this send to other authoritarian leaders about the reliability of their own security forces? These questions will be answered in the days and weeks ahead. For now, what we know is this. Nicolás Maduro is in American custody, his wife beside him, captured not through military conquest, but through the calculated betrayal of the very men sworn to protect him. In the end, his greatest vulnerability wasn't external enemies, but the weakness of the system he built around himself. This has been our special report. We'll continue to bring you updates as this extraordinary story develops. The capture of Nicolás Maduro through the betrayal of his own bodyguards marks a new chapter in the long and troubled relationship between the United States and Venezuela.
Ẹ̀yin ènìyàn wá ṣeun. Mi ò ní sọ̀rọ̀ pọ̀, mo ti sọ bẹ́ẹ̀ lórí fọ́nrán yìí. Fídíò yìí gangan ni mo gbé wá fún wa láti wò. Ẹ gbọ́ àwọn ọ̀rọ̀ tí wọ́n sọ ńbẹ̀. Kò le fún ìjọba Amẹ́ríkà to pick anybody in any way. Eré Sheikh Gumi, gbogbo èyí tó ń ṣe kóbókóbó kò sáyè fún ẹjọ́. Ìgbésẹ̀ tí ìjọba Amẹ́ríkà fẹ́ gbé lórí ọ̀rọ̀ ẹ̀, wọ́n ti decide already. Kò sí àríwé asán kankan, kò sí rọ̀bọ̀ rebe. Gbogbo wa lórí. Nígbà tí Gumi lọ sí orí page ẹ̀, gbogbo nǹkan tó sọ nípa Amẹ́ríkà ó lọ delete ẹ̀. Náà ó jáde síta ó wá ń parọ́. Gumi jáde síta ń sì ó wá ń parọ́. Ó lóun ò sọ bẹ́ẹ̀. nǹkan tó ti sọ tó ti kọ táwọn èèyàn ti keep ẹ̀ pamọ́ fún ẹ àbí mi ò gbé sórí fídíò tí mo jù lálẹ́ àná àbẹ́ẹ̀ rí mbẹ̀ ó wà mbẹ̀ ó wà mbẹ̀ ìwé ìròyìn dẹ̀ gbé àwọn news Daily Post gbé Vanguard gbé Punch gbogbo wọn kápátá ló gbé ìròyìn yẹn nígbà tí Gumi sọ pé Amẹ́ríkà ẹnìkan pè wọ́n láfọmọ Abuja this and that wọ́n fẹ́ eliminate wọn bó ṣe kọ síbẹ̀ nìyẹn náà wá ń jáde ẹgbọ́n nǹkan míì tó wá ń sọ ẹgbọ́n nǹkan míì tó wá ń sọ. Tí a bá fẹ́ kí ààbò wà ní Nàìjíríà ṣe rí àwọn ibi tó ń bọ̀mù kiri wọn yẹn kò ń ṣe bẹ́ẹ̀ náà bá tẹ̀ ti bẹ̀rẹ̀ àwọn tó ń ṣe agbódegbà fún wọn anyway a lè kọ́ wọn níṣẹ́ wọn torí ìlànà táwọn wà nìyẹn kí làwa mọ̀ mo nígbàgbọ́ pé lẹ́yìn ìgbà tí wọ́n bá kúrò lórí àwọn agbésùmọ̀mí wọ́n padà ń bọ̀ lórí àwọn tó jẹ́ bàbá ìsàlẹ̀ fún wọn àwọn bàbá ìsàlẹ̀ wọ́n padà ń bọ̀ lórí wọn kán bá wa píìkì gbogbo wọn láì dá ẹni kankan sí mo dẹ̀ nígbàgbọ́ tí ò bá ní ọwọ́ Tinubu nínú gbogbo ètò ń ṣe mi rò kán wá lè ṣe ara àwọn nǹkan kan tí Tinubu ṣe tínú mi dùn sí nìyẹn torí mo ti ń sọ tá a bá rí nǹkan tí Tinubu ṣe tó dáa tá a bá ń sọ èyí tó bá ń ṣe tó bá dáa ẹ jẹ́ ká sọ mo dẹ̀ rí fọ́nrán kan náà tí wọ́n post sí orí Facebook sísítà kan láàárọ̀ ẹ̀ níbi tí wọ́n ti kó handcuff sí Tinubu lọ́wọ́ àti ọmọ ẹ̀ tí wọ́n fi AI náà fi ṣe gbogbo nǹkan wọ̀nyí mi rò pa nídìí ẹ̀ kí nìkan tí Tinubu wọ́n ti bà Nàìjíríà jẹ́ kọjá Nàìjíríà ti tán kí Tinubu tó débẹ̀ àwọn àtúnṣe pẹ́pẹ̀pẹ́ èmi ò ń ṣe fáǹsì Tinubu mi ò ń ṣe politician ṣùgbọ́n mo ń sọ ohun tó ọ̀rọ̀ ni torí ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ wa a máa ń sábà attack no tá a bá rí nǹkan téèyàn ṣe tó dáa ẹ jẹ́ ká sọ so bó ṣe jẹ́ nìyẹn bó ṣe jẹ́ kó délé wọ́n lè build a country in a day it could possible Rome was not built in a day bó ṣe jẹ́ pé Rome ni àti àwọn Rome ni àwọn ló kọ́kọ́ lo agbára ọwọ́ wọn lágbára kọ́kọ́ wà àwọn ló colonize Rome tẹ́ ń wò yẹn àwọn ló kó àwọn UK lẹ́rú àwọn ló kọ́kọ́ kó wọn lẹ́rú ní UK tẹ́ ń wò yẹn UK àwọn náà kó àwọn Amẹ́ríkà lẹ́rú ṣe rí nǹkan bẹ́ẹ̀ yẹn nígbà tí agbára kúrò lọ́wọ́ àwọn Rome àti nǹkan agbára yẹn bọ́ sí ọwọ́ àwọn UK nígbà tí agbára kúrò lọ́wọ́ UK ló wá bọ́ sọ́wọ́ àwọn Amẹ́ríkà táwọn wá ń lo dáwọ́là lọ́wọ́ ń sìn torí ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ kò lè understand tá a bá ń sọ ńgbà míì pé àwọn UK tẹ́ ń wò yẹn àwọn ló colonize Amẹ́ríkà ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ lè má mọ̀ wọ́n máa wò pé yẹn báwo bó dẹ̀ ṣe rí gẹ́lẹ́ nìyẹn àwọn Rome wọ́n lò gbàtẹ́ pé in fact kì í ṣe wọ́n ní agbára gidi ń gbà yẹn Roman Empire kì í ṣe agbára kékeré ni wọ́n ní there is a lot of story history to go to that line but kì í ṣe àkókò láti sọ àwọn nǹkan wọ̀nyí lélẹ̀ bóyá nígbà míì wọn bá tá a mọ̀ ń bẹ̀ àwa náà á ṣe ẹ̀ pẹ̀lú àwọn ènìyàn wa bó ṣe rí nìyẹn ẹ wo mo kí wa ọdún yìí nǹkan rere á ṣẹlẹ̀ yípadà ìpànìyàn gbọ́dọ̀ bọ̀ kì í ṣe gbogbo bọ́n ṣe ń bọ́ọ̀mù káàkiri bẹ́ẹ̀ náà ni wọ́n ṣe ń pa àwọn èèyàn kiri ò tí máa wo ní ìwé ìròyìn sí there is a lot of news in there there is a lot kidnapper ẹ wo àwọn tó ń kó lánàá wọ́n jí àwọn èèyàn kó lánàá mi ò tí wo ìròyìn yẹn tán délẹ̀ ẹ̀ sìn àìmọye àwọn èèyàn tó wá ti kó lálẹ́ àná sí àbí láàárọ̀ yìí kọ́lọ́n kó ṣàfù wa kí ìjọba Amẹ́ríkà kan bá wa jáwé sóbì kan bá wa méṣọ̀ kan parí àwọn tó wá sílẹ̀ Yorùbá bá ṣe fetch wọn out òní kọta nídìí ń sìn àwọn ẹlẹ́ṣọ́ ààbò ilẹ̀ Yorùbá àwọn Àmọ̀tẹ́kùn àwọn gbogbo àwọn wọ̀nyẹn la nídìí wọn lọ́wọ́lọ́wọ́ ń sìn láti lè eliminate àwọn people láti yọ wọn kúrò láàrin wa Ọlọ́run á ràn wá lọ́wọ́ ẹ wo ẹ bá wa pín ètò yìí Àkàlàmàgò TV náà ni ẹ ṣeun.